All right, coming up, we have a great conversation with Rafael Barlowe. You know him from the NBA Big Board. You know him from NBA Draft Junkies. You know him for being one of the best talent evaluators and scouts around the industry. We talk about what it means to look at prospects both in the United States and abroad over in Europe, and why, even though the Brooklyn Nets don't have any draft picks, there are still avenues for them to improve this team as we look ahead to the upcoming season. Break it all down right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. We thank you for making us your first listen free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is going to be brought to you by Bet Online. They've got you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. And of course, as you can see, it's me, Adam Armbrecht, covering also the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. No delay, right into the conversation with Rafael Barlowe. It is a fun one from a scouting standpoint, from a roster building standpoint. We get into some names that you want to keep on your list here as we work our way through the offseason for Brooklyn, and also talk about how the rookies and Cam Thomas, Kessler Edwards, and Day'Ron Sharpe can continue to improve their game in the offseason so they can be that much more important to the Nets' success going forward. Let's get into it. All right, as promised, we teased this for probably a little bit longer than we should have, but we knew at some point we were going to reach out and get Rafael Barlowe onto the podcast to discuss what the Brooklyn Nets still have from an option standpoint, in spite of letting go of their draft pick in the upcoming NBA draft. Of course, though, Rafael Barlowe is he's more than just a podcast host. He's more than just a scout. Rafael, you are now Locked On extraordinaire, to say nothing of what you do away from the network as well. Just give everyone the breakdown of what you bring to the table over the course of not just the offseason, but throughout the NBA landscape, really diving in on what these players can be at the NBA level.
Oh man, this feels like my 90-second commercial. I have to
pitch me, Barlowe, and go.
Okay. So, so I took over for Chad Ford. That's probably like the biggest news. Chad is a legend in this draft space, and he, paved the way for someone like myself and other people that cover the draft. And he retired in April and left me his newsletter, which was, it was shocking to me, but definitely like a huge compliment to my work. And I've spent the majority of the last 4 or 5 years going back and forth between here and Europe, trying to learn the international game, because I figured that was one way I was going to be able to separate myself from everyone else in this crowded draft space that is looking to, just kind of make a name for themselves. So with my travels and the crazy amount of hours that I've spent watching film and being in gyms and airports, I'd say I have a pretty fair grasp of the NBA draft, and not only for this year, but for the next few years ahead.
I think Rafael's selling himself short. NBA Draft Junkies. I mean, he does incredible work, and you can find him everywhere. It's scrolling on YouTube. You can find him over obviously on Twitter and everything that he's doing. But I remember this is probably like 2 months ago when I saw something on Twitter where you were mentioning a player from Europe for next year's draft, not for this year's draft, for next year's draft. And just a little mention of, he's got the skill set, work on this area. And it just, in my mind, I was like, man, I mean, you're talking about logging the hours on a guy that you're a year away from really seeing the fruits of that, or what he can develop into. It's just a tip of the hat to you, because that's investment, especially when you're profiling these guys. Before we get on the Brooklyn Nets, I will say, because I remember you going over to Europe to continue to do some scouting overseas as well. What's the difference in the experience of scouting players over in Europe versus doing it here in the States? Because obviously they're playing professionally over there, as opposed to maybe at the collegiate level here, or a G League or Ignite, whatever it may be. Do you get a different sense of players when you're over there as opposed to scouting guys at the college level here?
Yeah, it's different levels to it, because, like, for example, there's no draft in Europe. So if you're bad, there's no reward for losing. So teams aren't always interested in playing younger guys. So, for example, there's a guy that he didn't enter this year's draft, but I thought he should have. But he was too good for like the junior levels, so he ends up going to a senior team. But now he's like the 11th or 12th man. So it's nearly impossible to evaluate him because he's not getting the playing time. So imagine how the NBA would be if there was no college basketball. So you had the top
Right.
high school player, and then there's nothing in between. So he's good enough to be in the NBA, but there's no draft. So you kind of stash him on your bench, and you hopefully he can play some minutes when the team is up. But there's no reward for losing, and there's not a lot of developmental minutes. So that can make it tough. And that's why, when I was younger, when I used to see the draft and it'd have a European prospect, and you're like 3.4 points per game, why is he projected in the lotteries? Because
right.
he wasn't good enough to play over the 28 or 29-year-old on the team, but he had the greatest upside. So the NBA teams were drafting him based off of what they saw him do when he played in with his age group. So that part can make it a little bit difficult. But for this past year, I spent mostly watching guys that it's crazy to say this, were born in like 2005 and 2006. So
Let's age ourselves, Rafael. That sounds insane to be looking at
Right.
players that are 20 years behind my age, my birth age.
Yeah. So it was more so about projecting future drafts, and then some of the guys that were in this draft that may have played small roles. I had to be specific and like, okay, they're playing this bad team, so if the game goes like I think it's going to go, he may get 20 minutes here. So I actually love the
Right.
challenge of it. I love traveling. I love Europe. And that's what makes it so much fun, as opposed to, not saying scouting in the States isn't fun, but I think I'd rather go watch guys play in like Madrid and Barcelona as opposed to small college town in the middle of the Midwest.
Sure, I could see reasons why there's some benefits there as well. Yeah,
it's not as accessible to get to Madison, Wisconsin.
I'll be in the
So,
south of Spain or in Wisconsin if I had to
yep.
make a choice. No, and it is from a scouting perspective, probably. You mentioned the challenge and just the reward of, hey, I am looking at this player and his skill set on limited samples and in practices and trying to really project what they can be, as opposed to in the States, the college level, where you go, yeah, there he is. He's going to play on one of the best teams in the country. You're going to see him in the, probably in one of the deep runs, the Elite Eight, the Final Four, and you have a somewhat more proven commodity. Not to say that there aren't still guys that come up, obviously, or players that don't quite hit the mark when we talk about the draft. That being the case, though, on the Brooklyn Nets side of things, I think I want to get to the draft pick here in a second, but there's two things that I want to ask first. It's what for you when you look at the Brooklyn Nets, what is their biggest need? The dovetail question is a basic scouting report on what you think Ben Simmons is going to be for Brooklyn. But we talk about backup point guard, someone who can be on the ball. We know they need wing, they need some guys on the wing, 3-and-D players, maybe more athleticism, a big that can produce something from outside the arc or even the mid-range game with consistency. If you had to put that hierarchy, what is the number one piece that Brooklyn would need to add?
It's tough to say a team that has as much talent as the Nets has so many glaring holes. Like I can't think of a team where I can say they have, 2, 3 all NBA type players, but I mean, we obviously haven't seen them play. But then you look at the roster and say there's holes, and then with Bruce Brown, I just saw a projection that he's worth $19 million a year.
Sure.
So I would say my first area of need would be a big, because I feel like you got to get past Joel Embiid if you want to make it out. And you just saw in the playoffs, Nick Claxton was a little too thin. And so maybe just addressing some size. And then, of course, the backup point guard, which I think they should be able to get Mike James back if that's, the rumors that I'm hearing. And I think he would be great. I mean, he was one of the best players in Europe, and I thought he played well when he was with the Nets 2 years ago. And then, of
Does
course,
he does he
wing
still have value
shooting.
to you? Does Mike James, he still has the NBA value? Because it's something that fans have said that, and you go back to the bubble and you see the run from Mike James. But what is the disconnect from a player that chooses to go play in Europe as Mike James has been doing, and saying, well, he still has value at the NBA level. It can be a personal choice, a financial choice, but you still see him being a viable option.
Yes, definitely. I think what Mike is, and I actually had a chance to interview him, and he came on my podcast about a year ago, maybe it's 2 years ago, and we talked about how he wasn't highly regarded coming out of college, and he had to go to Europe. So he got used to that
Hmm.
game. He got used to, being the guy where you have the ball in your hands, and you're playing 35 minutes, getting 10 to 15 shots. And he thought that he had mentioned playing in the NBA is a little easier than it is in Europe, because in the NBA you have your guys that are making 30, 40 million, and everyone around them just has to, be a compliment, play a complimentary role.
Hmm.
And I mean, he enjoyed his time with the Nets, but I just think, like, at least for him, like, he was playing in Monaco. I mean, one of the best places in the world. So I think it can be a decision of, do I go to the NBA and I play a role, maybe 18, 19, 20 minutes per game, or do I go live in Monaco and I am the guy, I'm featured,
Yeah.
and everything runs through me, and the season is a little bit shorter, and I have total freedom. So I think that could be a choice for that some guys have to decide that, whether or not they want to do it. And I've also some players that are in similar positions say, well, if I go to the NBA, my salary is going to be so low that I could just be a filler for trades. So do I want to risk being somebody that plays 30 minutes per game in Europe, and I know I'm going to be there all season because there's not like trades?
Hmm.
Or do I go to the NBA? I'm signing for $3, $4, $5 million a year, which is a drop in the bucket for NBA teams, but that money is just used as a filler for
Yeah.
a bigger trade. And that team that I get traded to may not want me. They just need the money to dump their unhappy superstar that's making 30 million. So it's little things like that.
It's funny, man, just beyond even Mike James to think about that, right? I mean, these are all top players in the sport. And if you think that the ego of a Jeff Green doesn't suffer over the years, in spite of he's made a very good living and he's been paid a lot. He's also been moved around a lot. He also can't seem to, stick with a roster. You want validation to whatever level you think you are. And you say for Mike James' case, well, in the NBA, you're a supporting cast member and you need to be there to serve whatever that superstar on that particular team may need or want from you. Whereas over in Europe, hey, I get to be the best version of myself, not to, to say nothing of living in Monaco maybe for a
Yeah.
portion of the year and getting to enjoy yourself. So those factors are just fascinating. Something I wanted to touch on with Mike James because it was kind of this little blip. He went away, and Nets fans still have a little bit of that longing for him. Okay, right back into the conversation with Rafael Barlowe after we tell you about our friends, though, over at Truebill. That's because you know that Truebill is the app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 per year with Truebill. That's because companies make breaking down your subscriptions and getting out of those contracts incredibly difficult. Truebill makes it very simple. You just link your accounts, and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap. And your Truebill, here we go, fancy word, concierge, is there when you need them to cancel the unwanted subscription so you don't have to do it. By the way, I know that I've said it before and I'll continue to say it because I keep finding other apps that I don't want anymore or have the duplicate versions of. Truebill has helped me get rid of a little known app that I was paying twice for. It sounds something like dun dun before it launches into its episodes. You can figure it out. They were there for me. Truebill has over 2 million users and has saved them over $100 million. Don't fall for the subscription scams anymore. Start canceling today at truebill.com/lockedonnba. Go right now to truebill.com/lockedonnba. It could save you thousands a year. We'll see if we get to Ben Simmons. That's fine because I have a pretty basic question on him. But the first big decision the Nets made this offseason was deferring the 23rd pick in the draft. That's going to move over into next year from Philadelphia. There's a lot of circumstances around Brooklyn why it makes sense to do that. You can still use that down the road at the trade deadline. There'll be more certainty maybe around what you need, clarity around what Ben Simmons is. There's a workout with Kyrie, Kevin Durant, all of those things. And also, from a prospect standpoint, do you look in and around 23 and say, I get why you would defer, but there are players here in this year's draft class that could come in and have an impact and serve a role that Brooklyn does need right now, or in conjunction with next year's prospects as well? Do you say the sound money is on getting better value next year?
I think it's a gamble. I think it's almost a gamble of, I think the Sixers are going to implode and the pick is going to be higher.
That's what
next
Doug pointed
year.
to. He said, hey, don't assume that 76ers are just automatically in another deep playoff run.
Yeah, I think that's where I think that's the bottom line. I don't have any insider knowledge on that, but it just seems like with the Nets, I mean, I think with this year's draft, there's some guys that could come in and help them at 23. I feel like between picks 15 through 35, there's not much difference. So I think you can get someone that, a lot of people may have thought was going to be a mid first round pick that could fall to 23. And if I were to address their needs for front court help, I do think that there's some guys that could possibly be available, which, I mean, if you think about it, Philly, since they traded Andre Drummond, needs some backup center help that they could end up drafting. But my guess, like I said, would just be, we think Harden is a year older. We just think that Embiid is going to get fed up and they may implode, or you don't want to bet on injury, but they're, an Embiid injury away from being a lottery team. So that would be my guess. But then I think, it could be the other way around because, the Nets have their own set of issues and question marks too. So, which if that's the case, if both of them end up having issues, then you could end up with, I forgot if the Nets have a pick next year, but
and then with multiple quality picks, just and one of the worst possible scenarios for the Brooklyn Nets fan base to have play out for sure. Okay, so then they do defer the pick, though. I start looking through some of these draft prospects, and you focus in on guys that are anywhere from 45 or 50th, and then beyond what will be a part of the two rounds of the NBA draft. I mean, there's a couple of guys, and it's shame on me. I'd taken a look at a couple of guys from Europe, and I'll be happy for you to put names out there for myself and for the Nets fans to get their eyes on and say, hey, here's a guy post-draft isn't going to be drafted, but the Nets should certainly be targeting. So feel free to put any of them in there. But the couple of guys that came to mind here, first, he's certainly further down the list, or at least on some boards, at one, Evan Mobley. He has a brother. His name is Isaiah. And he certainly has a skill set. It looks like you saw a better volume from beyond the arc this past season. Now, the percentage dropped down to 35 from the year prior, but his free throw percentage went up. It looks like he's going to be able to evolve that part of his game. He's not an inside big from that perspective. But do you see him? I don't know where you have him on your board or if you develop it that way. I've seen him in the 80s and 90s. So he's there. He's there to be had after the draft is said and done. Is he the type of player that you think has the ability to be an impact player in what Brooklyn needs as well?
Yeah, because he has a skill set that fits around your stars. And so, I mean, there's a premium for shooting and a big that can shoot. So I think that he's someone that would be worth developing. And I mean, I just think it would make sense. Well, one of the things that could help Brooklyn, and maybe I'm kind of getting off the subject a little bit here, is that I think now with agents are so creative. So let's say I'm an agent, right? And teams are wanting my guy as a two-way. My suggestion would say, no, don't draft him. I'd rather go undrafted.
Yep.
Because if he goes undrafted, now I can pick the spot to where I think that he has the best path to get some playing time. And if you look at some of these top heavy teams where their contract, they have like the majority of their payroll is structured around 3 or 4 guys. They're looking for cheap guys to come in and that can actually earn minutes. And one of the best examples was Austin Reeves last year. The Lakers had their big 3 guys. and Austin didn't get drafted, but he ended up signing a two-way deal with the Lakers. And then before the season started, it was converted into a standard contract, and then he ended up being one of their rotation guys. He may not have got that same opportunity if he went to another team where the salary was kind of spread out a little bit more. So I think that could be a situation for the Nets where they can end up getting somebody or with an agent that is strategic and says, no, I don't want my guy to get drafted. I would take a two-way with the Nets because I think that they need help at point guard. I think they need a shooter on the wing, and my guy can come in and at least be the eighth man in their rotation on a team that is expected to go deep in the playoffs. And you have to factor in it is Brooklyn, it is New York. So if you get this undrafted kid that cracks the rotation and plays a role, there's a story behind it, and New Yorkers are going to love the underdog story. So that would be my choice if I were an agent. I would be taking that angle.
And
it's a risk.
We even saw Kessler Edwards, who now was drafted, but he was that bit of a darling story for Brooklyn Nets fans, who ends up earning the contract. Now, the mechanics of dropping someone that the fans weren't big on in James Johnson just to roster a player and not use him in the playoffs. There's a lot of things we could talk about there, but how you end up maybe stealing value, whether it's in or after the draft, you're saying in that route, going with the agents and trying to find a best path for minutes. The only other guy, I'll just mention this, and then you can throw out, I want you to throw out a couple of names. Maybe give me a guy from Europe that you think the NBA just isn't going to be aware of and is worth bringing in for Brooklyn. But Jabari Walker out of Colorado with a 7-foot wingspan, he's not the biggest frame, and maybe that's something that deters Brooklyn from looking at him. I think he's only coming in just around 200 pounds. Does he have a developmental game? Seeing him certainly a little bit higher than Mobley was on a lot of these boards, but can he fall outside of there and be one of those agent two-way, hey, get me some minutes kind of targets?
Possibly. And especially for him, he shot like 50% from three as a freshman. And then with the expanded role, the numbers went down. And so I think that he played well. He rebounds. He just has like I think a role player's game. May not have this one thing that he does exceptionally well, but if he can develop into a consistent shooter, then it kind of opens everything else up. I think that he could get drafted, but I mean, this draft is going to be crazy. But he is someone that, I mean, he's young, he's athletic, he rebounds, just does a little bit of everything, but just may not have that skill set to hang his hat on, which could help him fall. And then if he ends up developing into an outside shooter, maybe he just had it could be something simple, like maybe he had an injury that that played a role in his shooting percentage declining. I talked to one guy and I was asking him, why was there such a big difference between his 3-point percentage? And he was flat out and said, as a freshman, I wasn't the number one guy on the scouting report, so I got open looks. As a sophomore, I was the number one guy. I had to take all the bad shots at the end of the shot clock, and it played a role in my percentage. But if that's the case with Walker, if he goes to Brooklyn, then he's not that guy. And now he's looking more like the shooter that he was before he was number one on the scouting report.
All right, a quick pause on the conversation with Rafael Barlowe just to let you know about our friends over at betonline.net. They're your number one source for all your betting, stats, and sports info throughout the season. It's not just about the NBA, it's the NHL, it's the NFL when that rolls around. They've got you covered soup to nuts. And this year's basketball finals matchup, of course, the NHL finals matchup, not to mention MLB along the way here, latest fighting news for MMA and UFC, all the way to boxing too. BetOnline is your continued source for all the sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. You head over to the website today or use your mobile device, and you can learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. European or otherwise, who's the guy? The draft ends. There's this pool of talent. Who should Brooklyn go get in your estimation and try to get on that beneficial, low cost, high value?
So there's this guy, right?
There's a guy out there.
I've been hyping him up since the first time I saw him play in 2019. And in my notes, I wrote, this guy is going to be the first pick in whatever draft he decides to be eligible for. He's 7'1", has like a 40-inch vert, is extremely athletic, 7'8" wingspan, right? So you're probably wondering, like, okay, why is it he? Well, the problem is that from what I've heard is, and I went to Spain, and I'm just like, am I seeing something? Am I the only one? And it's just all God given natural talent. Like, he's from Senegal, so based off of what I've heard, it's like someone saw him. The whole typical story. Someone discovered him in a sense, put a basketball in his hand, and he just walked on the court and was just so naturally gifted.
Mm.
Oh, the problem is, since I saw him in 2009, he still hasn't really improved much. Not 2009, I'm sorry, 2019. So he's still really raw offensively. Every once in a while, he makes some plays where you're just like, is this Rudy Gobert 2.0? But the problem is, he just hasn't really developed. And I guess the knock on him in a sense is that everything has come easy to him.
Mm.
He may not understand plan and structure. The game may be too fast. But for me, I think it is totally worth the risk. His name is Abu Baji. If you even go to like my NBA Draft Junkies YouTube page, and his name is IBOUBADJI, you watch his film, you're gonna be like, oh my God, this kid is a freak of nature. I mean, he jumps so high that he may give the other team 2 to 4 points per game from goaltending, but he sends a message. Freak
Yeah.
athlete, decent hands, but and just in my opinion, I think that if he were to play, let's say for the Nets, right? You have someone like Durant who could maybe take him under his wing
Mm.
and let him know, like, the sky's the limit for you, or this is how you work. Come in, work on your game. But then all he really have to do is run the floor, catch lobs, block shots. So I think he could be like this Robert Williams type impactful player. But I think it's all up to him whether or not he wants to, if he loves basketball like that. Because again, it's one of those things where everyone I've talked to said it just has come that easy to him.
Good Lord. Well, someone to dream on here for the Brooklyn Nets. And, from a Nets standpoint, you mentioned, it's not 1-to-1 in terms of position, but Cam Thomas looked like he got the Kevin Durant under your wing treatment, and really helped motivate him during his rookie season, obviously,
I
and
think
got a lot more.
he was
Go ahead.
born with elite. He came in with elite confidence.
Oh yeah, well by the way, yeah. I mean, listen, you go back to the summer league, knocking down the I'm losing every ball, I can't control it. Also, I just knocked down a buzzer beater short. Yeah, Cam Thomas did not lack for confidence coming into the NBA. But to your point though, it's like it doesn't hurt, and we'll get out of here on this. With the way the Nets are currently constructed, I mentioned Kessler Edwards earlier, Day'Ron Sharpe, and then Cam Thomas. We battered around the ideas of, do you maybe utilize Cam Thomas to improve your team because he's already proven he can do it. Long term, you can feel excited about these young players. The one curiosity on Kessler Edwards is he just not quite athletic enough by today's NBA standards, and sometimes why guys go later in the draft than earlier. Those three rookies, though, can they all be a part of? Should they all be a part of what Brooklyn does going forward here? Because as it stands right now, we think Cam Thomas, first guy off the bench, let him improve the areas that we already think he can. Consistency from beyond the arc. We saw the body control, the physical presence, even for being relatively small in stature. Are these guys capable of being contributors for this team and helping them get over this hump of old bodies breaking down and not enough just youth energy and a little bit of vitality for this Brooklyn team?
Yeah, I think they'll have to be. I really do. I think Edwards, I mean, he'll have another year under his belt. I think he has a specific role. Now, he will be the guy that teams probably hunt in the playoff series, just because, that's what we're seeing going on. And maybe you can say the same for Cam Thomas. But I think Day'Ron has a really good opportunity to, just kind of make a name for himself. Doesn't have to do a whole lot. Just defend, rebound, run the floor, maybe a couple hard fouls here and there, in a sense, just to kind of be this physical presence. But I think that this is a big summer for those guys. I expect to see all three of them on the summer league team, and I think with the confidence that comes with having a year under your belt, I think that they can come in and have an expanded role this year. But I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to. It's really important for the Nets to develop them.
Yeah, and this is something we talked about all off season and over this past year. The NBA has shifted over the last handful of years. It's not the superstar talent at the top and then fill it in with veterans. The league is better prepared coming in from day one than it used to be. So you have to accentuate and maximize that value. So hopefully the Brooklyn Nets do that. Listen, we're not going to take any more time from Rafael Barlowe here. Hopefully we'll give him a nice big breather here to get through the draft coverage, give all the other teams around the league that have draft picks some insights around their prospects, and then catch back up with him a little bit on the back end and see some of the guys that come in hopefully for Brooklyn and if they maybe get some of these diamonds in the rough that can help them going forward. Rafael, one last time though, where do you want people to go immediately first and foremost as the draft is just a handful of days away?
Yeah, you can find me at NBABigBoard.com. That is the newsletter that I took over for Chat Ford. It's exclusive content, and it's a lot of information that a lot of intel from scouts or NBA executives and different agents. And then I'm on Twitter, Barlowe, BARLOWE 500. I tweet about the draft there. Or maybe, you find some non-draft topics every once in a while.
You can't be singularly focused all the time, Rafael. Come on.
Right. I tell people, like, this is my personal page that covers the draft as opposed to a draft page with
right.
the opposite. And then there's the Locked On NBA Draft Big Board. And so we're up to 5 days a week and talking a lot about the draft. It's kind of tough in a sense because, it's almost like I've been talking about this draft since August. And now everyone has this interest in the draft. I'm talking about condensing the same stuff I was talking about the last 8 months into every episode. But at the end of the day, man, I enjoy talking the draft. And so we're 5 days a week, Locked On NBA Big Board.
Love it, man. Appreciate the time. Obviously, no one needs me to tell you. You can hear I'm throwing names out randomly off the cuff. He's giving me in-depth, detailed analysis, saying how they can fit with Brooklyn. I'm sure he can tell you how he can fit in with any number of teams around the NBA. So check him out. You'll see the links in the show notes as well. Rafael Barlowe, appreciate the time, man. Hopefully we get to catch up again after a long reprieve on the coast of Monaco.
Yeah, anytime. Summer League. Let's do Summer League.
That's it. Be well.
All right.